The Galactic Academy of Unified Species was the oldest school in the known universe. It had been teaching students for 12,000 years. Every intelligent species that joined the Galactic Concord sent their best young people to learn there. The Academy floated in space, a massive station the size of a small moon, filled with classrooms and training halls and libraries that held the knowledge of 1,000 worlds. Instructor or had been teaching combat fundamentals for 300 years. He was a silicate, a being made of living crystal that glowed with soft blue light. His body was tall and sharp, like a statue carved from gemstone. He had seen students from hundreds of different species pass through his classroom. He thought he had seen everything. Then the humans arrived. Humanity was new to the galaxy. They had only discovered faster than light travel 2 centuries ago. Their home planet, Earth, was a small world on the outer edge of the galaxy. Nobody had paid much attention to them. They seemed unremarkable, soft bodies, no natural weapons, short lives. The Galactic Concord had accepted them mostly out of politeness. When the Academy received notice that a human exchange student would join the Combat Fundamentals course, or felt something his species called mild annoyance, the human would probably struggle with even the most basic exercises. He would have to slow down the entire class to accommodate this fragile newcomer. The human's name was. Her file said she was 23 years old. She had served in something called the Terran Defense Force before applying to the Academy, or did not know what that meant. Human military organizations were too new to have any reputation. On the first day of the new semester, or stood before his class of 47 students. They came from dozens of species, each one impressive in their own way. Was a warrior. His people had 4 arms and hard shells covering their bodies. They had practiced martial arts for 10,000 years. Their combat forms were famous across the galaxy. Was a Florian. Her body was made of thick vines wrapped together in a shape that looked almost humanoid. Those vines were strong enough to crush metal. Her species did not need weapons. They were weapons. Was a being made of colored gas held together by a natural force field. His people were peaceful and avoided fighting when possible. He was taking this course only because it was required for his degree. There were others too, with razor-sharp limbs, reptilians with armored scales, telepaths who could attack the mind directly. Each student represented the peak of their species' physical development. And then there was. She walked into the classroom wearing simple gray exercise clothes. Her skin was brown and smooth, completely unprotected. Her hair was black and pulled back from her face. She was shorter than every other student in the room. Her arms were thin. Her body looked soft. Several students turned to look at her, clicked his mandibles in what his species used to show amusement. Vines rustled with dismissive movement. Even gentle pulsed with a color that meant doubt. Found a seat near the back of the room. She did not seem bothered by the stares. Her face was calm and her eyes moved slowly across the room, looking at each student in turn. There was something strange about the way she looked at them. Not fear, not nervousness, something else that or could not identify. He began his usual first-day speech. He explained the course goals. Students would learn basic combat assessment, threat recognition, defensive techniques, and controlled offensive maneuvers. The goal was not to create warriors. The goal was to ensure that every graduate of the Academy could protect themselves if necessary. Most species in the Galactic Concord were peaceful. Wars were rare. Violence was uncommon. But the universe was large and not everything in it was friendly. Sometimes, knowing how to fight meant the difference between life and death. After his speech, or announced that they would begin with baseline assessments. Each student would enter the training ring and face a series of holographic combat drones. The drones would attack in simple patterns. The sensors would measure how each student responded. This would help or understand what each student already knew and what they needed to learn. He called students forward in alphabetical order by species name. The arachnoids went first, their 8 legs carrying them through the exercise with natural grace. The followed, their massive bodies absorbing drone strikes without reaction. Species after species demonstrated their natural abilities. Finally, or reached the end of his list. Human. She stood up and walked toward the training ring. Her steps were quiet. Her movements were smooth. She stepped into the ring and stood in the center, waiting. Around the room, students settled in to watch. Most expected this to be quick and somewhat embarrassing. Humans were new. Humans were soft. Humans had no natural combat abilities that anyone knew about. This assessment would probably show that needed to start at the very beginning with the most basic exercises. Or activated the first level of drones. 3 holographic figures appeared around. They were simple shapes, humanoid in form, glowing with soft light. They would move in predictable patterns, testing basic reflexes and threat awareness. The first drone moved toward. It was not fast. It was not tricky. It simply walked toward her and raised one arm as if to strike. What happened next made Or's crystalline body flicker with surprise. Did not stumble backward. She did not freeze in panic. She did not do any of the things that new students typically did when facing their first combat simulation. She moved. It was a small movement, just a single step to the side, but the timing was perfect. The drone's arm passed through empty air where she had been standing a moment before, and before Or could fully register what had happened, his hand shot out and struck the drone in what would have been its throat. The drone flickered and vanished, disabled. The room went quiet. Returned to her waiting stance. Her breathing had not changed. Her expression had not changed. She looked exactly the same as she had before the drone attacked. Or felt something he had not felt in a very long time: uncertainty. He looked at the sensors. They showed that his heart rate had barely increased. Her stress hormones had not spiked. Her body had responded to the attack as if it was completely normal, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. He looked at the human standing calmly in the ring. She was watching him with those strange eyes, waiting for the next drone. Or made a decision. He increased the difficulty. 2 more drones appeared. They began to circle, moving faster now, their patterns less predictable. Did not seem concerned. She simply watched them move, her body relaxed, her hands open at her sides. The drones attacked together and began to show the class what a human could really do. The 2 drones came at from opposite sides. This was a standard test. Most students handled it by focusing on one threat and trying to avoid the other. It was messy but effective enough for beginners. Did something different. She moved toward the drone on her left, which surprised everyone watching. Moving toward an attacker was not what most species did naturally. But as she moved, her right hand came up and caught the second drone's strike without looking. Her eyes never left the first drone. Her body seemed to know exactly where the second attack was coming from. She twisted her hips. The motion was small but powerful. The second drone's arm was pulled off balance. At the same moment, her left hand struck the first drone in the center of its chest. The drone flickered and died. Before it had fully disappeared, had already turned and disabled the second drone with a quick strike to its neck. 2 drones, less than 3 seconds, had not taken a single step backward. The classroom was silent. Even, who had spent his entire life training in combat, had stopped clicking his mandibles. Or stared at the sensor readings. They told him things that did not make sense. His movements were economical. She used minimum energy for maximum effect. Her body positioning was nearly perfect. And strangest of all, she had responded to the second drone before it had fully committed to its attack. She had predicted where it would be. This was not beginner-level performance. This was not even intermediate, or had seen elite warriors from ancient combat species who moved with less precision. He increased the difficulty again. Level 3. This level was normally reserved for species with predatory backgrounds. 6 drones appeared around. They moved in erratic patterns designed to overwhelm sensory processing. They attacked in overlapping waves that made it impossible to focus on just one threat. The response made several students gasp. She did not try to fight all 6 drones at once. She moved. Her feet carried her in a circular pattern that kept the drones from surrounding her completely. She was always positioning herself so that only 2 or 3 drones could reach her at any moment. She was using their numbers against them, making them get in each other's way. When a drone got close enough to strike, did not simply block or dodge. She redirected. She used the drone's own movement to push it into the path of another drone. She grabbed limbs and twisted bodies. She found angles that let her control attackers twice her size. One by one, the drones fell, moved through them like water flowing around stones. There was no wasted motion. Every step had a purpose. Every movement created an advantage. When the last drone flickered and vanished, stood alone in the ring. She was breathing slightly harder now, but only slightly. A thin layer of sweat covered her skin. She looked at instructor Orr and waited. The silence in the room was heavy. 46 alien students stared at the small human female who had just destroyed a level 3 combat assessment without taking a single hit. Was the first to speak. Her voice came out as a whisper carried on vibrating air. What discipline is this? What fighting style? Turned to look at the Florian. She seemed to consider the question carefully. That was boxing, she said. Her voice was calm and matter-of-fact, and some judo for the redirects, basic self-defense techniques, pretty standard stuff. Or's crystal body dimmed with confusion. Basic, standard. Yeah, said. She shrugged her small shoulders. This is what we teach kids back home. Elementary-level combat training. I'm not even that good compared to professional fighters. The room erupted in noise. Students turned to each other, speaking in dozens of languages. The translators built into the room struggled to keep up, or heard fragments of conversation. Words like impossible and terrifying and how floated through the air. He raised one crystalline arm, and the room slowly quieted. Human, he said. His voice resonated through the space. You are telling me that what we just witnessed is considered elementary by your species. Nodded, pretty much. I mean, I had some extra training in the military, but the basics. Most humans learn some form of fighting when they are young. Schools teach it. Parents teach it. It is just part of growing up. Stood up from his seat. His 4 arms were held in a position that showed deep respect among his people. My species has practiced martial arts for 10,000 years, he said. What you just demonstrated would take a student decades to learn. You say humans teach this to children. Looked uncomfortable for the first time since arriving. Not exactly like this, she said. Kids learn simpler versions, but the principles are the same. Footwork, timing, how to use an opponent's strength against them. Humans have been teaching these things for thousands of years. Or felt his crystal structure vibrating with an emotion he rarely experienced. It was something close to shock. He had assumed the human would need remedial training. Instead, she had just demonstrated skills that surpassed most of his advanced students. He looked at with new eyes. She stood in the training ring, this small soft creature from an unremarkable planet, and she had just shattered everything he thought he knew about combat assessment. Human, he said slowly, I think we need to have a longer conversation about your species' history with violence. His expression changed. Something moved behind her eyes, something old and tired and strangely sad. Yeah, she said quietly, I figured you might want to know about that. She stepped out of the training ring and walked back toward her seat. Every student in the room watched her pass. They looked at her differently now. Before, they had seen a fragile newcomer from a primitive world. Now they saw something else. They were not sure what it was yet, but it made them nervous. Sat down and folded her hands in her lap. She did not look proud of what she had done. If anything, she looked like someone carrying a heavy weight, like someone who knew things she wished she did not know. Or ended the class early. He needed time to think. He needed to research human history. He needed to understand how a species so young and so fragile had developed combat skills that rivaled the galaxy's oldest warrior cultures. He had a feeling he was not going to like what he found. As students filed out of the room, stopped beside seat, he looked down at her with all four of his eyes. "You are not what I expected," he said. Looked up at him. Her expression was hard to read. "Humans never are," she replied. She stood and walked out of the room, leaving staring after her. For the first time in his life, the warrior felt something he had never expected to feel when looking at such a small and soft creature. He felt the beginning of fear. Instructor or asked to meet with him after class the next day. She agreed without asking why. She had been expecting this conversation since her demonstration in the training ring. They met in his office, a room filled with crystalline structures that hummed with stored data, or had spent the entire night researching human history. What he found had disturbed him deeply. He was not alone in his curiosity. Word had spread quickly through the academy. Several students had found reasons to linger near his office, stood in the hallway pretending to study a display case, had wrapped her vines around a nearby pillar, her sensory nodes pointed toward the door, even floated nearby, his gaseous form flickering with the colors of intense interest. Or decided to let them listen. What he was about to discuss concerned them all. "Human," he began, "I have reviewed the historical records your species provided when joining the Galactic Concord. I have questions." Sat in a chair designed for much larger beings. Her feet did not touch the floor. She looked small and harmless, or now knew that appearance was deeply misleading. "Ask your questions," said. "I will answer honestly." Or's crystal form pulsed with blue light. "Your species has been technologically advanced enough to keep detailed records for approximately 5,000 years. In that time, how many major wars has humanity fought?" Was quiet for a moment. She seemed to be counting in her head. "Major wars, thousands, maybe tens of thousands depending on how you count. If you include smaller conflicts, the number is much higher." Or had expected this answer. His research had prepared him, but hearing it spoken aloud still made his crystalline structure vibrate with discomfort. "The Galactic Concord has existed for 12,000 years," he said. "In that time, there have been 17 significant military conflicts between member species. Total casualties across all conflicts, approximately 42 million sentient beings." Nodded slowly. "That sounds about right for what I read about galactic history." "In your 20th century alone," or continued, "your species killed over 100 million of your own kind. In organized warfare. This does not include deaths from crime, accidents, or individual violence." Did not look away. "Yes," she said. "The 20th century was bad. We had 2 world wars, several genocides, a lot of smaller conflicts that people have mostly forgotten." "Why?" Or asked. The question came out sharper than he intended. His species did not usually show emotion, but this topic was affecting him. Why would any species wage such constant war against itself? What could possibly justify such destruction? Was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different, heavier, older somehow. "You want to understand human violence," she said. "But to understand it, you need to understand something about Earth, about how we evolved." She leaned forward in her chair. "Earth is not a gentle world. It has predators and poisons and diseases. It has weather that can kill. It has earthquakes and floods and volcanic eruptions. Our planet tried to kill us every single day for millions of years." She held up her hands, small, soft, no claws, no armor. "Look at these," she said. "We have no natural weapons, no shells, no venom. We are slow compared to most predators. We cannot see in the dark. We cannot smell danger from far away. By all logic, we should have gone extinct. Then how did you survive? Asked from the doorway. She had stopped pretending not to listen. Looked at the Florian. We survived by being smart, by working together, and by being more violent than anything else on our planet. She stood up and began to pace slowly around the room. Humans learned to make weapons, rocks, sticks, spears, knives. We learned to hunt in groups. We learned to set traps. We learned that if something threatened our tribe, we could kill it before it killed us. Her voice grew quieter. But the most dangerous thing on Earth was never the animals. It was other humans, other tribes, other groups competing for the same food, the same water, the same safe places to sleep. Stepped into the room. His forearms were folded in the gesture his species used when receiving important information. You fought your own kind, he said, for resources. For everything, replied, resources, territory, religion, pride, revenge. Sometimes for no reason at all except that we could. Humans have always been our own worst enemy. She stopped packing and faced the alien students who had gathered in the doorway. Every culture on Earth developed fighting techniques, she said, independently, without any contact with each other. The Chinese created hundreds of martial arts. The Japanese developed their own styles. The Greeks invented wrestling and boxing. The Brazilians created capoeira. The Israelis created MAGA. Everywhere humans lived, they invented ways to hurt and kill each other more efficiently. Why? Asked. This form was dark with distress. Why would you do this? Why would you perfect violence against yourselves? Because we had to, said simply. The groups that did not learn to fight were conquered by groups that did. The individuals who could not defend themselves were killed by individuals who could. Violence was not just common on Earth. Violence was survival. She sat back down. She suddenly looked very tired. What you saw yesterday in the training ring was 5,000 years of human combat knowledge, passed down from generation to generation, refined by endless wars, tested in millions of real fights. Every technique that did not work was abandoned. Every technique that did work was kept and improved. She looked at Or. Your species has practiced combat for 300 years, she said. They have practiced for 10,000, but you practiced for sport, for honor, for tradition. Humans practiced because losing meant death. There is a difference. The room was completely silent. The alien student stared at the small human female as if seeing her for the first time. We are not proud of what we are, said quietly, but we cannot pretend to be something else. Humans are violent. We have always been violent. The only thing that has changed is that we have learned to control it, mostly. Or process this information. His crystal mind tried to categorize humans alongside other known species. Predator, yes, but also prey, aggressive, extremely, but also cooperative, dangerous, more than he had ever imagined. One final question, he said. You said humans have learned to control your violence. How? After so many of war, how did your species survive long enough to reach the stars? Smiled, it was a strange smile, sad and proud at the same time. We got tired, she said. After the 20th century, after we invented weapons that could destroy our entire planet, we finally got tired of killing each other. We did not stop completely. We probably never will, but we learned to channel it differently. She looked at her hands again. Now we fight in sports arenas instead of battlefields. We compete in business instead of war. We argue with words instead of weapons. And when we do have to fight, we try to make it quick, clean, controlled. She stood up again. That is what you saw yesterday. Not violence, control. The control that humans have spent thousands of years learning because the alternative was extinction. She walked toward the door. She paused beside and looked up at the towering warrior. Your people trained to display skill, she said. Humans trained to survive. That is the difference. That is why your 10,000 years of practice cannot match what we learned in 5,000 years of war." She walked out of the room, leaving stunned silence behind her. Or looked at his students. He saw fear in their eyes, he shared it. Humans were not just another species joining the galactic conquered. They were something the galaxy had never encountered before. A species forged in the fire of endless war against themselves. A species that had turned survival into an art form. For the first time in 300 years of teaching, or wondered if he was the one who had something to learn. The weeks following's revelation changed everything at the academy. Word spread beyond the combat fundamentals class. Soon, students from other departments were finding excuses to observe or sessions. Scientists began requesting interviews with. The academy's administrators held emergency meetings to discuss the implications of human combat abilities. Or quietly changed classification. On paper, she was now listed as a specialist observer rather than a student. The official explanation was that her presence provided valuable cross-species learning opportunities. The real explanation was simpler. She had nothing to learn from his beginner's course. If anything, she could have taught it. Accepted her new role without complaint. She attended every class. She watched the other students practice. She answered questions when asked, but she did not participate in the exercises. There was no point. It would have been like asking a master painter to practice drawing circles. The other students' attitudes toward her had transformed completely. They no longer looked at her with pity or dismissal. Now they watched her the way prey animals watch predators, with respect, with caution, with a healthy amount of fear. Was the first to approach her directly. He found her alone in one of the academy's observation lounges, looking out at the stars. His 4 arms were held in a position that communicated formal respect. "I wish to train with you," he said. Turned to look at him. Her expression was neutral. "Why?" "Because I have spent my entire life believing my species had perfected combat. You showed me I was wrong. I want to understand what humans know that we do not." Studied him for a long moment, then she nodded. "I can show you some things. But you need to understand something first. Human fighting styles were not created for people with 4 arms and natural armor. A lot of what I know will not work for your body." "Teach me anyway," said. "Even if I cannot use the techniques, I want to understand the principles behind them." They began training together the next day. Word spread quickly. Soon, a small crowd gathered to watch whenever and practiced. The warrior was powerful and fast. His natural advantages were obvious, but moved around him like smoke around stone. She was never where he expected her to be. When he struck at her, she was already gone. When he defended, she attacked from angles he had not considered. "Your movements waste nothing," observed after their 3rd session. "My people have trained for, but we train for honor. We train for display. Our fighting forms are beautiful but inefficient. Human fighting styles evolved differently," explained. "We could not afford to waste energy. When you might face someone twice your size, or multiple attackers, or enemies with weapons, every movement has to count." She demonstrated a simple technique. A step, a turn, a redirect of force. "See how I moved? I did not try to stop your strike. I moved out of its path and used your own momentum against you. Your strength became my weapon." Tried to copy the movement. His body was not built for it, but he began to understand the principle. "You fight as if every exchange could be your last," he said. "Because it might be," replied. "Humans are fragile. We do not have backup organs. We do not regenerate. One mistake in a real fight means death. So we learn to end fights as quickly as possible, maximum damage in minimum time." Others began joining their training sessions. The Florian wanted to understand how her overwhelming strength could be turned into a weakness, showed her how predictable power became, how speed and positioning could defeat raw force. "You swing your vines like clubs," told her, But a club is only dangerous on the forward arc. Once you commit to an attack, your body is locked into that motion. A fast opponent can exploit that. But I am stronger, protested. I can crush metal. And I can step to the side, replied. Then what? You have to recover from your swing. That takes time. In that time I can strike you 3 times. She demonstrated, moving around to attack and tapping her in 3 different vulnerable spots before the Florian could respond. Svines rustled with surprise. How did you know where to strike? Humans have been studying anatomy for thousands of years, said. We know where bodies are weak. We know where nerve clusters are. We know where blood vessels run close to the surface. Every species has vulnerable points. The trick is learning where they are and how to reach them quickly. Even attended the sessions, though he could not participate physically. The floated nearby, his gaseous form flickering with intense concentration. Your species terrifies me, he admitted one evening, not because you are violent. Many species are violent, but because you have made violence into science. You have studied death the way we study mathematics. Considered his words carefully. That is fair, she said, but think about it from our perspective. Because we have studied violence so thoroughly, we also understand why not to use it. We know exactly how much damage a fight can cause. We know how easily things can go wrong. That knowledge makes us cautious. She sat down on a bench and looked up at the. Violence is easy, she continued. Restraint is hard. Any animal can lash out when threatened. It takes discipline to control that instinct. Humans have spent thousands of years learning that discipline. Pulsed with colors that indicated deep thought. So your combat training is not really about learning to fight. It is about learning when not to fight. Exactly, said. The best human warriors are not the ones who win the most fights. They are the ones who avoid fights entirely. Fighting should always be the last option. The sessions continued for weeks, taught not just techniques but philosophy. She explained how human militaries train their soldiers to be weapons, but also train them to control their weapons carefully. She described the rules of engagement that governed human warfare, the laws that protected civilians, the treaties that banned certain types of weapons. The alien students struggled to understand. Their species had also developed rules of war, but nothing as complex as what humans had created. Nothing born from such desperate necessity. Your species created these rules because you were so good at killing, said slowly. He was beginning to grasp the terrible logic of human history. You had to invent laws to stop yourselves. We had to, agreed. After the 20th century, after we created nuclear weapons that could destroy our entire planet in hours, we realized something important. Our ability to kill had exceeded our ability to survive what we created. If we did not learn to control ourselves, we would go extinct. She looked at her hands, the same small, soft hands that could disable an opponent in seconds. That is the real lesson of human combat training, she said. Not how to fight, how to control the part of ourselves that wants to fight, how to be dangerous without being destructive, how to be warriors without being monsters. The alien students looked at her with new understanding. They had seen her as a fighter. Now they saw something more complicated. A being from a species that had looked into the darkest parts of itself and somehow found a way forward. You reached the stars despite yourselves, said quietly. Smiled, it was a tired smile, a survivor's smile. We reached the stars because of ourselves, she corrected. All that violence, all that death, all that competition, it pushed us forward, made us smarter, tougher, more determined. We did not succeed in spite of our nature. We succeeded because we learned to point our nature at problems instead of each other. She stood up and stretched her small body. That is what we can teach the galaxy, she said. Not how to fight. You already know that. We can teach you how to control the fight, how to use violence as a tool instead of letting violence use you. She walked toward the door. Think about it, she said over her shoulder. and let me know if you want to keep training tomorrow." She left the room. Behind her, a warrior, a Florian stronghold, and a thinker looked at each other in silence. They had come to the academy to learn from the galaxy's greatest teachers. Instead, they were learning from a human. A small, soft, terrifying human who had shown them that true strength was not about being powerful. True strength was about controlling power. Tomorrow they would train again. The semester ended with a formal exhibition. This was a tradition at the academy. Students demonstrated what they had learned before an audience of administrators, instructors, and visiting representatives from across the galactic Concord. It was part celebration and part evaluation, a chance for young people to show their progress and for the academy to prove its value. This year's exhibition drew an unusual amount of attention. Word had spread through the Concord about the human student in the Combat Fundamentals course. Delegates from dozens of species traveled to the academy specifically to see what all the talk was about. The observation hall was packed with beings of every shape and size. Instructor or stood at the center of the exhibition floor. His crystalline body glowed brighter than usual. He was nervous, though he would never admit it. What was about to happen would change how the galaxy understood humanity. The other students performed first, demonstrated a new fighting form that blended tradition with human efficiency. His movements were sharper now, less about display, more about effect. The audience noticed the difference even if they did not understand it. Showed a Florian defensive style that had never been seen before. Instead of relying on raw strength, she moved with unexpected grace. She redirected attacks instead of absorbing them. When she struck at precise points for maximum impact. Even presented something new. They had written a detailed analysis of psychological conflict resolution. He explained how understanding violence could help prevent it, how knowing what harm looked like made peaceful alternatives more attractive. The audience listened with genuine interest. Finally, or called forward. The human stood up from her seat in the audience. She wore the same simple gray exercise clothes she had worn on her first day at the academy. No armor, no weapons, just a human, small and soft and completely unremarkable in appearance. She walked to the exhibition floor. Every eye in the room followed her. Human has agreed to provide a final demonstration, or announced. She will face our advanced combat drone array. This is the same system used to train elite military operatives across 37 member species. A murmur ran through the audience. The advanced array was famous. It had been designed by combining the deadliest combat knowledge from every major species in the Concord. Even trained warriors rarely completed the exercise without significant damage. Stepped into the marked area at the center of the floor. She rolled her shoulders once, cracked her neck, took a slow breath. The array activated. 20 drones materialized around her. They were not the simple holographic shapes from her first assessment. These were sophisticated combat simulators. Each one had been programmed with fighting algorithms harvested from the galaxy's most dangerous species. They moved with perfect coordination, communicating with each other, hunting as a pack. The audience leaned forward. Many expected this to be the moment when human limits were finally revealed. 20 elite combat drones against one small, unarmed human. Surely this was too much. Moved. What followed was unlike anything the audience had ever witnessed. She did not fight the drones, not in the way they expected. She flowed through them. Her body twisted and turned, always in motion, never where the drones expected her to be. When they struck at her, they hit empty air. When they surrounded her, she slipped through gaps that should not have existed. But she did not just dodge, she attacked. Each strike was precise, economical. She hit drones in their sensor clusters, blinding them. She struck their joint mechanisms, crippling their movement. She found weaknesses in their programming that no one had noticed before and exploited them ruthlessly. One by one, the drones fell, moved through them like a storm through trees. There was no wasted motion. Every step, every turn, every strike served a purpose. The audience could see years of training in her movements, decades, centuries, of accumulated human combat knowledge flowing through her small body. And they could see something else too: control. She was not trying to destroy the drones. She was disabling them with minimum force. Every attack was designed to end the threat without causing unnecessary damage. She was demonstrating not just her capacity for violence but her mastery over it. The last drone fell. The arena fell silent. Stood alone in the center of the exhibition floor. She was breathing harder now. A fine layer of sweat covered her skin, but she had not taken a single hit, not one. The sensors displayed her performance statistics: reaction time, accuracy, efficiency. Every measurement was off the charts. Several delegates leaned forward to read the numbers, unable to believe what they were seeing. Or stepped forward. His crystalline form was dim with something that might have been reverence. "Distinguished guests," he said. His voice echoed through the silent hall. "What you have witnessed is not merely combat proficiency. It is the product of a species that has waged war upon itself since before recorded history, and yet stands here today among the stars as a peaceful member of our concord." He turned to look at. "When human arrived at this academy, I questioned whether her species belonged in my course. I now understand my error. Humans do not need to learn violence. They have mastered it more thoroughly than any species we have encountered. What they demonstrate instead is something far more valuable." He paused. "They demonstrate control. They show us how a species can contain the violence in its nature, how warriors can choose peace without losing their strength, how the most dangerous beings can also be the most disciplined." Wiped sweat from her forehead. She looked tired, but when she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. "We are not proud of what we are," she said. She addressed the entire audience, representatives from dozens of species who had traveled across the galaxy to see her. "But we do not pretend to be something else. Humans are dangerous. We have always been dangerous. We accept this about ourselves." She looked at her hands, small, soft, capable of terrible things. "The difference is that we have learned to be dangerous for something," she continued, "not just to each other. We spent learning to kill. We have spent the last few centuries learning when not to kill. Both lessons were necessary. Both lessons cost us dearly, but we learned them." She looked up at the stars visible through the observation windows. "The galaxy is large and old and full of challenges," she said. "There are threats out there that we have not encountered yet, mysteries we cannot solve alone, problems that will require cooperation between all species if we want to survive." She turned back to the audience. "Humans cannot offer you strength. Many of your species are stronger. We cannot offer you speed or armor or natural weapons, but we can offer you something else. We can offer you the lessons we learned through blood and fire and endless war, the knowledge of how to fight when fighting is necessary, and more importantly, the knowledge of how to stop fighting when the fighting is done." She walked back toward her seat, stood and offered her a gesture of deep respect. Vines reached out to touch her arm in acknowledgement, pulsed with colors that meant pride and hope. The audience watched her pass. The representatives from dozens of species saw something they had not expected, not a primitive newcomer from an unremarkable world, but a representative of something ancient and hard-won, a species that had survived itself, a people who had learned to master their own darkness. Instructor or spoke the closing words of the exhibition. "The Galactic Academy of Unified Species has welcomed thousands of races over its 12,000-year history," he said. "Each has brought something unique. The brought honor. The Florians brought strength. The brought wisdom. Today, we have learned what the humans bring." His crystalline body glowed with warm light. "They bring determination. They bring control. They bring the knowledge that even the most violent natures can be turned toward peace. And perhaps most importantly, they bring hope. Hope that if humanity could survive itself, then anything is possible. Reached her seat and sat down. The exhibition was over, but something had changed. Something had shifted in how the galaxy understood the small, soft species from the unremarkable planet on the outer edge. Humans were not just newcomers anymore. They were not just survivors. They were examples, living proof that darkness could be mastered, that violence could be controlled, that even the most terrible history could lead to a bright future. As the audience began to disperse, leaned over to. "You have changed how we see your species," he said quietly. "Perhaps how we see ourselves as well." Smiled, it was a small smile, tired but genuine. "That is all we wanted," she replied. "Not to be feared, not to be admired, just to be understood." She looked out at the stars again. Somewhere out there was Earth, the small world that had forged her people through fire and blood, the planet that had taught them violence and then forced them to learn restraint. "Give us enough time," she said softly. "Give us challenges worthy of what we are, and we will fight entropy itself to a standstill." Did not fully understand what she meant, but he believed her. After what he had seen, he believed every word. The galaxy had welcomed humanity, and humanity, against all odds, was ready to welcome the galaxy back, not as conquerors, not as threats, but as partners, as friends, as a species that had finally found something worth fighting for beyond itself. The stars waited, and humanity, as always, was determined to reach them.